Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kishore Mahbubani. I'm the Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. I know that you all came to listen to my friend Tom and not to me, so I'll be very brief. I'd like to essentially make a few points. First, I'll begin with an apology. For those of you who have not managed to get seats in the auditorium and are sitting outside the hall, we do apologize for the fact that we could not change the hall or find a bigger venue. We thought that we would get, as we normally get, about 200, 300, 400 people turning up. This hall would have easily fit everybody in. But Tom, you made a mistake. You became too popular. And we got 1,100 people signing up. So the good news is that we've got seats in different parts of this building, and everyone will be able to listen to Tom. But those who couldn't come in, my apologies. Second, of course, I would very much like to, on behalf of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, thank Tom for agreeing to come and to speak at our school. Because for us, as a school of public policy, one of our critical missions, in a sense, is to try and understand the larger world out there. And having distinguished speakers, as we had, like Pascal Lamy a few weeks ago, the new Director General of WTO, or Tom Friedman coming to speak here, really makes a tremendous contribution to the growth and development of the school. And for this, Tom, we thank you very much. Now I also have to, as a chairman, say a few brief words to introduce the speaker. But that's, in a sense, a very stupid thing to do, because the speaker, obviously, is much better known than I am, as you can tell from the huge turnout that we've had today. You know all the facts of his life. He was born in Minnesota, educated in Brandeis University, a master's in Middle East Studies from Oxford University, 3 times Pulitzer Prize winning winner, author of 4 best-selling books. All these facts, I think, are quite well known about Tom. So I thought what I could do is perhaps, from a very personal point of view, describe how I think Tom has made an enormous difference. 1, at the global level, 2, at the national level, and 3, at the individual level. Now, at the global level, I think it's not a secret that we do live in confusing times. There's so much change taking place in the world out there. Things are happening on the political front. Things are happening on the economic front. Things are happening on the technological front. And we have so much difficulty collecting all this data and trying to put it together in a coherent whole so that we can understand the world as a whole. Fortunately, we have someone like Tom who travels frequently around the world, meets people, talks to everyone, and tries to give us a coherent picture of the whole. And that, I would say, is a major global contribution that he makes. At the national level, as we all know, the most powerful country in the world today is America. The country that has the greatest impact on the rest of the world is America. And it's also a fact that the world today is somewhat confused about America's relations with the world. We have seen the good things that America has done. We have seen the problems that America has created. And we're still trying to figure out what is America's place in the world. Here again, I think Tom has done a brilliant job of both, by the way, explaining the world to America and explaining America to the world. And his columns are now syndicated in over 700 newspapers worldwide. And in that sense, you can see what a major contribution he makes. And finally, at the individual level, for those of you who have not had the pleasure of getting to know him as a person, I can tell you, as someone who's had the benefit of getting to know him over the years, that he's a remarkably generous individual. Even though he's someone, I can tell you, who mixes with kings and queens and sheikhs and prime ministers, he always has his feet firmly on the ground. Indeed, I asked him, how do you do this, Tom? He says, well, I always go back and mix my old friends in Minnesota, the people with whom I went to play as a child in school, and that's how I stay grounded. And I can tell you that he has time for everybody, and for me personally, when I went to Washington, D.C. a few months ago to do a book launch of my book, an Asia Society asked me whether or not there was someone whom I think I could invite to be a commentator. I said, you can try Tom Friedman, but he's too busy, you'll never get him. So they tried Tom Friedman, and he said yes. And despite his busy schedule, he took time and came and did this. He does this for his friends. And for this, Tom, thank you very much. And now, over to the person whom you all came to listen to. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you.
Tell us why the world is flat.
Thank you very much, Kishore, for that generous introduction. It's a treat and an honor to be here at the Lee Kuan Yew School. If you don't like what I say, or whether you like what I say, it's all Kishore's fault. There aren't many people I would come half a world away for an invitation, but Kishore is one of them. He's been a good friend, a source of great insight, and you should all know an incredibly effective and potent and popular ambassador for Singapore, not just officially, but unofficially. So if you like what you hear, if you don't like what you hear, it's all his fault. What I'm going to do for the next half hour or so is talk to you about the thesis of my book, The World is Flat, and then I look forward to opening it to a discussion. This book came about completely accidentally. I was not planning to write this book, not something I hankered to do my whole life. It came about completely by accident, and that has to do a lot with the content of the book. So let me explain the progeny. I became the New York Times Foreign Affairs columnist in January of 1995. Excuse me. And from January 1995 until September 11th, 2001, my column really oscillated between Lexus issues and olive tree issues. Issues about trade, finance, and technology, and issues of geopolitics and traditional ethnic conflict. And I was really in that, oscillation mode between my Lexus and olive tree reporting right up till September 10th, 2001. And after the events of September 11th, I really dropped the Lexus like a stone and went off and covered the olive tree wars. I spent the next 3 years really almost exclusively in the Arab-Muslim world trying to understand the roots of 9/11 and follow the post-9/11 encounters in Afghanistan and Iraq. I made one trip during those 3 years back to my old stomping grounds in Silicon Valley. I went to visit a startup company that some friends of mine were involved in called Google. I did one column about Google and went back to Kabul. And that was kind of the mood and mode that I was in right up until January of 2004. I'd recently started doing documentaries for the Discovery Channel in partnership with the New York Times. We did one on the roots of 9/11. We did one on the wall that Israel was building in the West Bank. And in January of 2004, we were sitting around with our Discovery crew trying to figure out what should we do our next documentary about. And at the time, the issue of America's unpopularity in the world was very high. Why do they all hate us? And so I had this idea. I said, why don't we go to call centers all over the world and interview young people, foreigners, who spend their days imitating Americans about what they think of America. I thought it'd make a kind of interesting double mirror, basically. Well, we were literally budgeting out that documentary when a certain Democratic presidential hopeful named John Kerry came out with his blast against Benedict Arnold CEOs. American CEOs who outsource. And suddenly the issue of outsourcing became this huge issue in American politics, in the primary campaign, on the cover of Forbes and Fortune and the New York Times and Business Week and the Wall Street Journal. So I said, wait a minute, time out. Why don't we just go to Bangalore, the capital of outsourcing, Bangalore, India, and do a documentary called The Other Side of Outsourcing, where we'll look at this phenomena from the ground up and explain to Americans what it's about. Well, Discovery liked that, and the Times liked that, so on February 15th, 2004, off I went to Bangalore with my Discovery crew. And in the space of 11 days, I think it was, we shot about 60 hours of interviews. And I have to tell you, across those 11 days, I got progressively sicker and sicker. And it was not the food. It was a realization that dawned slowly from those interviews. Somewhere between the Indian entrepreneur who wanted to do my taxes from Bangalore, and the one who wanted to read my x-rays from Bangalore, and the one who wanted to write my new software from Bangalore, and the one who wanted to trace my lost luggage on Delta Airlines from Bangalore. Somewhere between all those interviews, I realized that while I had been sleeping, while I had been off covering what I thought was the biggest story in the world, the 9/11 wars, something really big had happened in the Lexus world, in this globalization story, and I had completely missed it. And I wish I could show you some of the outtakes of our interviews. I'd be there with Jerry Rao, the head of NASCOM, the Indian High-Tech Association, and Jerry would literally be trying to get me to do my tax returns, have them done from India. And I would say to him, Jerry, what did I miss? I missed something. Stuff is happening, and I don't even understand how this can happen technologically. Well, the last interview we did was with Nandan Nilekani, who is the CEO of Infosys, one of the crown jewels of the Indian high-tech firmament. Nandan's an old friend, and he was the last interview we did. He had been out of town during the first part of the trip, and before the interview went on camera, he and I were sitting on the couch outside his office. I had my laptop out and just talking about what I'd seen during my previous 11 days. And at one point, Nandan said, Tom, I've got to tell you, the global economic playing field is being leveled, and you Americans are not ready. Oh, I wrote that down in my little laptop. The global economic playing field is being leveled, and you Americans are not ready. Well, after that interview, I got back in my Jeep with my Indian driver driving barefoot and bounced back to the hotel in Bangalore. And along that road, I kept rolling over in my mind, as is my wont, what Nandan had said. Because what Nandan, it seemed to me, was really telling me was, after a while I thought, that the global economic playing field was being flattened. And then, in the chemical way these things happen, it just popped into my head. What Nandan is telling me is that the world is flat. This Indian high-tech entrepreneur, one of the brightest men in India, is telling me the world is flat. And he's citing this as a great achievement in human development, that we've made the world flat. Well, I went back to my hotel. I called my wife. I said, honey, I'm going to go on leave. I'm going to write a book called The World is Flat. She now says that she was totally enthusiastic. Okay. I don't quite remember it that way, but I came home and I told my editor and publisher, basically, ladies and gentlemen, I have to go on leave immediately. I have to go on leave immediately because my intellectual software, my framework for looking at the world and measuring what's important and what's not, take a break. Do some of that. Yeah. My intellectual software really needs updating. Because when I went to Bangalore, I realized that my software was out of date. And I told my bosses, if I don't go on leave immediately, I am going to write something really stupid in the New York Times. It's a great way to get a leave, actually. Okay. Well, a leave they granted me, and I got 3 months off eventually to write the book, but I basically wrote this book between March 15th, when I really sat down to start, and December 15th of 2004, in a fit of sort of obsession. And would recommend writing a book that way, but there you have it. And what I'd like to talk about, basically, is the essential argument of this book. Now, the book opens with me noting that Christopher Columbus set sail in 1492 looking for a shorter route to India. That's actually where Columbus was going in 1492. He was looking for a shorter route to India, the source of riches and power in his day. He had the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. He never did find India. But he called the people he ran into in North America Indians. And we call them that to this day. And Columbus did come home and say, honey, I never did find India, told his wife, but I did accidentally discover that the world is round. I set off for India 512 years later. I knew just which direction I was going. I went east. I had Lufthansa business class, and a GPS satellite that popped up in my seat told me just where I was all the time. And after the encounters I had in India, I came home and told my wife, honey, I've accidentally discovered the world is flat. And the first chapter really details the encounters I had in India that began to lead me to that conclusion. But unlike Columbus, I didn't stop in India. I kept going east. Next to Dalian, China, the Bangalore of Japan. Dalian, China, former Port Arthur, is a city where today tens of thousands of Japanese-speaking Chinese are writing the software and running the business process operations of major Japanese multinationals and American multinationals formerly based in Tokyo. Let me repeat that very slowly in case you think you didn't hear me right in light of recent headlines between China and Japan. Tens of thousands of Japanese-speaking Chinese are running the back rooms today of major Japanese multinationals from Dalian, China, where there are Japanese language schools on every other corner, and Japanese language is required now in many high schools and universities. And then I kept going east, went to Colorado on vacation, called up one day JetBlue Airlines, the most profitable airline in America, to see if they flew from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. I was actually doing a little research at the time. Got a rather elderly-sounding woman on the phone. And, excuse me, after she told me that JetBlue didn't fly between Atlanta and Washington, I said to her, ma'am, can I ask you your name? She said, my name is Dolly. I said, Dolly, could I ask you where you are right now? She said, honey, I'm up in my bedroom, in my slippers, looking out at the most beautiful scene of Salt Lake City, Utah. Because JetBlue, the most successful airline in America today, was founded by a devout Mormon named David Neeleman, who believed that families will best be held together if mothers can work at home. And so he has designed a complete home reservation system. So if you call JetBlue, you may get Dolly in her bedroom, who will make your reservation on her laptop or PC. You may get Betty in her basement. You may get Sue in the hot tub, because JetBlue has a complete home reservation system where your call is routed to someone's home in Salt Lake City, Utah. And then I kept going east. Came home to Washington, D.C., where I live, picked up the Washington Post one day, and there was a story that McDonald's had just started a pilot project whereby if you go to the drive-in window at a McDonald's, you got the kids in the back of the station wagon, you hit the button there at the drive-in window and you order 6 Big Macs and 6 fries and 6 milkshakes for the kids. You're not talking to someone at that McDonald's. You're actually talking to the McDonald's call center in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where someone there is electronically taking down your order and your picture and zapping your picture and your order electronically by DSL line to a food preparer in that McDonald's, who then takes it off a screen, prepares your food, and matches your picture and your order when you drive up to the window. McDonald's discovered that they drove down their error rate by a significant degree by doing this and could save about 30 seconds on each order. So the world is being flattened around us in ways that many of us have no clue about. Now, I really end that chapter with the kind of meta-argument of this book, which is that there have been three great eras of globalization. The first era I call globalization 1.0. And it shrunk the world from a size large to a size medium. And that era of globalization lasted from 1492 till the early 1800s, 1820. It was the beginning of global arbitrage. And that era of globalization, globalization 1.0, was defined by the fact that you went global in that era through your country. Countries and nation-states were the agents of globalization, whether it was the British Raj in India, Columbus discovering America, Portugal in East Asia. The agent and engine of globalization was the country. Globalization 2.0 was from the early 1800s till the year 2000. That's right, it just ended. And that era of globalization shrunk the world from size medium to size small. And that era of globalization was defined by companies globalizing. You went global in that era through your company. Companies globalizing for markets and for labor. While you were sleeping, certainly while I was sleeping, it is the argument of this book that we entered globalization 3.0, from 2000 to the present. And this era of globalization is shrinking the world from size small to size tiny and flattening the global playing field at the same time. But what is unique about this era is that this era of globalization is not built around countries globalizing. And it's not built around companies globalizing. What is unique about this era is that it is built around individuals globalizing. What is unique about this era is that it both enables and enjoins individuals to compete globally and to think of themselves as part of a global competition. So we've gone from a globalization built around countries to one built around companies to one increasingly built around individuals. And the job of the nation state now is actually to empower and enable and connect your individuals so they can compete globally. Now, the second chapter of the book, the one that took me the longest, and the longest, it's about a third of the book actually, is called The 10 Days That Flattened the World. And it was really my attempt to try to answer that question I had when I came to Bangalore. How did this happen? How did the playing field get leveled? And I argue there are 10 events and technologies and companies that kind of made this possible. And I call them the 10 forces, 10 days that flattened the world, because I build most of them around a date. So let me go through them quickly. The first day is 11/9. 11/9/89. Not 9/11, 11/9. In a wonderful accident of dates, the Berlin Wall fell on 11/9, November 9th, 1989. And I call this first flattener, these are my 10 flatteners, when the walls came down and the windows came up. Because the Windows operating system 3.0, the breakthrough system, shipped 5 months after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So both these events happened at the same time. The wall came down and the windows came up. Now, why was that such an important flattener? Well, the fall of the wall was a hugely important flattener because it allowed us to look at and think of the world for the first time as a single flat plane. I dare say if we'd gone back into the archives of this university, you discover that before 1989, no one was using the word globalization. Very few people. People would speak about Eastern policy or Western policy, a Northern policy or a Southern policy, but no one spoke about, few people spoke about a global policy. You couldn't have a global policy because there was a wall in the way. The fall of the wall was hugely important because it enabled companies and countries and individuals to actually think about the world for the first time in a long time as a single flat plane. Now, the rise of the Windows, which happened at the same time, was a huge flattener, hugely important, because the Windows-enabled PC, this all happened at the same time, the Windows-enabled personal computer allowed individuals for the first time to create their own digital content. It enabled every one of us to create our own digital form of every type of expression. Words, music, pictures, video. With that Windows-enabled PC, we didn't have to go to the big mainframe, the big Oracle, and get it to create digital content. We all had what Bill Gates called information at our fingertips. We could all become authors of digital content. And that, in hierarchy terms, was a huge flattener. The second flattener, and I'll explain how that all ties in a little later. The second flattener, second date, is 8/9/95, August 9th, 1995, which I consider to be one of the most important days in Western civilization. We just passed the 10th anniversary. A few people noted it. August 9th, 1995 is a day that changed the world forever. Because on August 9th, 1995, that was the day that a small startup company in Mountain View, California, called Netscape, went public. And Netscape going public, Netscape's IPO, was a huge flattener for two reasons. First of all, what did Netscape invent? Netscape invented the browser. And the browser was the device that brought the internet alive. Before the browser, all the internet was a bunch of addresses that if you had the other person's address, you could go look at their digital files. What the browser allowed was people to illustrate on computer screens everything in your WW website or my WW website. And once we could illustrate on computer screens what was in your website and mine, we brought the internet alive, not just for a bunch of geeks and computer scientists, but for grandma and grandpa, grandson and granddaughter. Netscape brought the internet alive as a tool connecting people with people more cheaply and more extensively than ever before in the history of the world. Second, hugely flattening effect of Netscape is that Netscape's going public, becoming a public company on the New York Stock Exchange that morning of August 9th, 1995, triggered the dot-com boom. And that triggered the dot-com bubble. And that triggered the crazy, insane, absurd, ridiculous, outrageous overinvestment of $1 trillion in 5 years into fiber optic cable. And that crazy investment of $1 trillion in fiber optic cable, accidentally, with no one planning it, made Singapore and Seattle and Beijing and Brazil all next-door neighbors without anybody planning it. That overinvestment in fiber optic cable, which allowed us to send words and music and voice over the internet, virtually for free, accidentally wired the whole world together. You remember how it happened? Netscape went public on the morning of 8/9/95 at $28. Jim Barksdale, the CEO at the time, his bankers wanted them to make it a $32 stock, and he said, I want to keep it under 30. If this fails, I don't want anyone to remember this is a $30 stock. Well, that morning, Netscape opened at $72. It closed that first day at $56. And we all looked at that, and we said, whoa, there is gold over them there hills. And what did we do? We all went out and bought Singapore Telephone and Nextel and JDS Uniphase and Global Crossing. All these fiber optic companies. Come on, admit it. It's in your retirement package. You can't fool me. And when we did, we accidentally funded the overwiring of the entire world. And we accidentally drove down the cost of transmitting words and music and data from Singapore to Seattle, to New Delhi to Beijing, to virtually zero. Now, we did this once in America in the middle 1800s. We did it with railroads. When railroads first appeared, we did the same thing. There was a massive overinvestment in railroad stocks. And the net result was that Americans got to ride for free. And we accidentally knitted our country together. There's just one difference with the fiber optic boom. When we wired the world with fiber optics, Indians, Chinese, Singaporeans, Brazilians all got to ride for free. And if you know anything about fiber optics, just know this. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Because once it's in the ground, and all you have to do is keep improving the switches on each end, and you get more and more capacity. We haven't even begun to stretch, let alone exceed, the capacity limits of what has already been installed. So this was a huge flattener. The net result of bringing the internet alive and basically wiring the world was that we connected people with people more cheaply and more extensively than ever before. The third flattener is something I simply call workflow. And workflow is my shorthand for all the software and all the standards that ended up connecting all those PCs with all that bandwidth. Now, you're all too young to remember. You look too young. But when AOL and CompuServe first came out, if you were on AOL and your wife was on CompuServe, it was pretty hard to communicate with each other. And when this university started, and they first got computers, they thought that was really cool. And each department became so much more efficient. The administration department became so much more efficient. The payroll department became so much more efficient. There was just one problem with all that early software, was that payroll was running Novell, and administration was running Windows. And these two software programs were like two different fire hydrants with two different nozzles. They couldn't connect. So whenever there was an issue between administration and payroll, someone actually had to take the paper and walk from administration over to payroll. Well, during the mid-1990s, there was a quiet revolution in the world of software, where all these software companies that basically were trying to sell you a vertical silo, buy all my software for everything, that broke down, and they all began to agree on common standards. And when that happened, when my software can connect with your software, that meant we could all suddenly start to work together on more stuff. Well, now we come to what I would call the genesis moment of the flat world. Because when you take that Netscape breakthrough, people able to communicate with other people farther, faster, and more cheaply than ever before, and you add it to the software revolution, the workflow revolution, everyone's software able to be interoperable with everyone else's. What was created in the late 1990s was a whole new global platform for collaboration. Suddenly, more people could collaborate with more other people on more kinds of projects from more different places, in more different ways, on more different days than ever before. That's when the flattening of the world first begins. At the end of the 1990s, we got the genesis of the flat world, mid to end 1990. Now, the next 6 flatteners are the 6 new forms of collaboration that immediately appeared, burst off this platform, and flattened the world even more. Let me go through them quickly. The first, of course, is outsourcing. Outsourcing is just a new form of collaboration, where now I can take the payroll department of this university and outsource it. And outsource it to India, North Bangalore, or North Dakota. On this new platform, either one is equally easy. Outsourcing, new form of collaboration. Second new form of collaboration is offshoring. Offshoring is where I take my whole factory now and move it from Canton, Ohio to Canton, China, and integrate it into my global production chain. Now, I build each of these around a date, so outsourcing I build around Y2K, which was really the beginning of outsourcing, when we outsourced the remediation of all these computers to Indian programmers in Bangalore. Y2K, in fact, should be a national holiday in India. A friend of mine calls it Indian Interdependence Day. Okay. Hugely important event. Offshoring, I build around the day China joins the World Trade Organization, because that took offshoring, new form of collaboration, to a whole new level. The third new form of collaboration I call uploading. Uploading. And uploading may be the most revolutionary new form of collaboration. Because what the new platform was allowing was for individuals not just to download, but to upload. So uploading includes everything from open source software. Think about it. A bunch of geeks sitting at home, each with their own computer, are writing the next great operating system called Linux. Linux today has 15% of the global operating system from Microsoft. It's just a world market Microsoft dominated. And they're doing it for free. Now, how would you like to be Bill Gates? How would you like to be Bill Gates, actually? You dominated this whole market, and anytime a competitor rose up to Microsoft, well, you undercut them on price. It's hard to undercut free. So we have a whole new form of collaboration. Individuals working at home. The one I profile in my book is actually Apache. You know, all your computers run on the Apache web server. Apache was done by a bunch of geeks working at home for free. So one day, IBM said, you know what, your system is better than ours. We're going to throw in the towel, and we're going to have our engineers join Apache. Now, I don't know how many of you use Firefox, web browser. Firefox was developed by a 19-year-old at Stanford working with a 24-year-old in New Zealand who never met. They produced a web browser that was downloaded 10 million times in the first month. It took 5% of the Microsoft Explorer market in it wasn't 1 month, but in about a 3-month period. So we're talking about a whole new form of collaboration where people can now upload their software, not just download. But uploading doesn't just apply to software. Blogging. I can now upload my own commentary. I don't need to read Tom Friedman or the New York Times. I'm going to upload my own take on the world. Blogging. Whole new form of uploading. Now we got podcasting. I'm going to be my own network. I'm going to put up a podcast of my songs, my music, my poetry, my commentary. Wikipedia. I don't know how many of you use Wikipedia. I only use Wikipedia. Wikipedia is the uploaded encyclopedia. It's an open source encyclopedia that was written by individuals contributing their own entries. Oh, but how can it compete with Encarta? How can it compete with Encarta? You know how many entries there are in Encarta on your little computer that you got from in your Microsoft Office package? 65,000. You know how many entries there are in Wikipedia today? There'll be more tomorrow. 435,000. People have uploaded their own encyclopedia. So uploading, this is a whole new revolutionary phenomenon. The third new form of collaboration. The fourth new form of collaboration is supply chaining. Supply chaining is what Walmart does, like nobody else. They've created a global supply chain where if I take an item off the shelf of a Walmart in Arkansas, another copy of that item is immediately made in Shenzhen, China, and sent along the supply chain back to every Walmart store. Do you realize if Walmart were a country, it would be China's 8th largest trading partner today, ahead of Canada and Australia. So we are talking about a supply chain that operates down to the last atom of efficiency, the likes of which the world has never seen before. I have a friend who does supply chain logistics at MIT, Yossi Sheffi, who likes to say, you know, Tom, making stuff, oh, hell, that's easy. Supply chain, now that's really hard. Think about it. Walmart is the biggest company in America today, and it doesn't make a single thing. Simply developed a supply chain that gets products from manufacturers all over the world to consumers around the world more efficiently than ever before. This is a huge, flattener and new form of collaboration, only possible in this flat world. The fifth new form of collaboration I call insourcing. Insourcing. Insourcing is what UPS does. You all have UPS here in Singapore? Yeah. You know those people with the funny brown trucks? In the funny brown shorts? If you think all they're doing are delivering packages, oh, you're not paying attention. What UPS does today I call insourcing. They come right into your company, right up to your neck, right up to headquarters, and they take over your complete internal logistics operation. So let's say you have a Toshiba laptop, and it breaks one day, and you go to the warranty, it says call 1-800-TOSHIBA-HELP. So you call 1-800-TOSHIBA-HELP, and they tell you, take your Toshiba laptop down to the UPS store, and they'll send it to us, and we'll fix it, and you'll have it back in 72 hours. Here's what you don't know if you're in America. Your Toshiba laptop goes from the UPS store to Louisville Airport in Kentucky, which is the UPS hub, where in an airline hangar at Louisville Airport in Kentucky, your Toshiba laptop is repaired by a UPS employee in funny brown shorts. It never touches Toshiba's hands. They're not interested in it. They have insourced that entirely to UPS. So, that's okay. You want to get some sneakers for the kids, right? New pair of tennis shoes. You go to Nike.com. Here's what you don't know. On the other side of that screen is a UPS employee. They're taking your order. They're picking and packing your shoes. They're delivering them. They're billing you. They're collecting the money. Nike is not involved at all. You see the Papa John's pizza truck go by? Don't know if you have Papa John's here in Singapore, guess who's driving? Someone in funny brown shorts. Because Papa John's has insourced the delivery of their dough from their bakeries to their outlets to UPS. Friends, there are hundreds upon hundreds of companies today that do not touch their products in the least. They have been completely insourced to UPS, and this is a huge flattener because to do this on a mass scale requires massive standardization. The sixth new form of collaboration I simply call informing. Informing. And informing is what Google does. Yahoo, Microsoft Search. I can now inform myself. I can mine my own data to a depth and breadth unheard of in the history of the world. I can inform myself now. And this is a hugely important new form of collaboration. So just to recap for a second, we have the first three flatteners. They created this platform for collaboration. We have the six new flatteners that spring from this platform immediately: outsourcing, offshoring, insourcing, supply chaining, uploading, and informing. 3 plus 6, that's 9. But I said there were 10. What's the 10th? The 10th flattener I simply call the steroids. The steroids. And the steroids are wireless technology, voice over the internet, file sharing, and Moore's law about the development and speed of microchips. What all these steroids are doing together is turbocharging all six of these new forms of collaboration. So now I can do any one of them from anywhere with any device, totally mobily. Those are the 10 days that flattened the world. Now, let me finish with the next chapter, which just ties up the core thesis, which is called the triple convergence. The triple convergence. And what I basically argue in this book is that right around the year 2000, three huge convergences happened that really flattened the world. The first convergence was all 10 of these flatteners that I've cited started to converge. And when they did, in economic terms, the complementarities between each of them all started to work together. So the informing helped the outsourcing helped the offshoring, the insourcing helped the outsourcing, the uploading helped the supply chaining. And right around the year 2000, they hit a kind of critical mass, a kind of tipping point that I would argue made the world flat. It made the world flat in the sense that it gave us a global, web-enabled platform for multiple forms of sharing knowledge, work, and entertainment, irrespective of time, distance, geography, and increasingly even language. When I say the world is flat, no, I don't suggest, I explain later in the book, that everyone's got this platform. I don't suggest that it's perfectly flat everywhere. But what I do suggest is that we have created a global, web-enabled platform for multiple forms of sharing knowledge, work, and entertainment that is going to be the key to prosperity in the coming years. That wealth will go to those countries, companies, and individuals that get the infrastructure and the education to connect more of their people to this platform for multiple forms of sharing knowledge, work, and entertainment. That is what I mean when I say the world is flat. And that was the first convergence. Excuse me. Now, the second convergence, which we're just at the beginning of, is that we have to all change our habits in order to kind of get the most out of this new platform. We're basically going from a world where value was created in vertical silos of command and control to a world where value is going to be created increasingly horizontally by who you connect and collaborate with. Well, as that happens around this new platform, then the way you get the most out of it is you got to adjust your habits. Now, we went through something like this before when we went through the invention of electricity. Paul David, the Stanford economist, did a study once asking a very interesting question. Why was it when electricity was first invented, the electric motor, we didn't get a boost in productivity? It took about 10 years. That's because so many habits had to change first. First, we had to redesign buildings away from tall buildings that could accommodate big steam pulleys to low-slung factories that could operate around small electric motors. And then management had to change. And then management consulting had to change. And only when all those things changed did we suddenly get a huge boost in productivity. Well, I would argue we're just at the beginning now of the same kind of transition where we're all having to learn how to horizontalize ourselves. And I actually learned this in a very personal way while writing the book. My oldest daughter goes to college in New Haven, Connecticut. I live in Bethesda, Maryland. To get from Bethesda, Maryland to New Haven, Connecticut is a complete pain in the behind. You have to drive 40 minutes to Baltimore Airport and then take Southwest Airlines from Baltimore to Hartford and then drive an hour from Hartford to New Haven. Well, I'm a Southwest fan. Don't know how many of you have flown Southwest or know about it. Southwest is the second most profitable airline in America. It's El Cheapo Airline. El Cheapo Airline. And you don't get a ticket on Southwest. You don't get a reserved seat. You just get a ticket that says A, B, or C. A's board first, B's board second, C's board last. You do not want to be a C on Southwest Airlines. If you know anything, know that, okay? Especially if it's the spring, you're taking 2 bags of carry-ons for your daughter, and you want to have room above the seat when you get on in the bin, and you don't want to get stuck in the middle. You do not want to be a B or a C on Southwest Airlines. No problem. I'm a hip guy, so I did the e-ticket thing. Got my e-ticket ahead of time, had my secretary call, American Express, got e-ticket. But just in case, I got to Baltimore Airport 95 minutes before the flight because I was going to be an A. And got to the Southwest e-ticket machine. I stuck my Visa card in, and out came my ticket, and it said B. I said, this thing is fixed. This is rigged. This is worse than Las Vegas. There is no way I'm a B. I'm here 95 minutes before this flight. There's no way that many people got here ahead of me. There is no way I'm a B. Ooh, I was mad. Went and got my Cinnabon and sat in the back of the B line. I sat there stewing for 45 minutes. And then they called the flight. And then I saw it. All the A's started getting on, carrying what looked to me like crumpled, white, home printer paper. As though they had gone online at 12:01 a.m. the night before and downloaded and printed out their own boarding passes and took all the A seats. Well, of course, what I didn't know was that thanks to that the first convergence, Southwest Airlines had just begun a program where any customer could download and print out at home their own boarding pass at 12:01 a.m. the night before. Oh, friends, I saw that. I said, Friedman, you are so 20th century. You are so globalization 2.0. I mean, think about it. In globalization 1.0, there was a ticket agent. I used to have to go down to K Street, take a number, stand in a line at the United Airlines office, wait till I got to the front and do the ticket with a nice, man or woman there, real body in front of me. And then we got the e-ticket machine. We thought that was cool. That just happened. And while you were sleeping, thanks to that convergence of those 10 flatteners, Southwest Airlines made you, the individual, your own ticket agent. And to look at it another way, Southwest Airlines made you their employee. And actually, to look at it yet another way, if you happen to value your own time staying up at 12:01 a.m. the night before, you are now paying Southwest Airlines to be their employee. All that, friends, all that just happened. And it's happening in every industry today. Now, next time I will stay up at 12:01 a.m. the night before. I will download and print out my own boarding pass. And I will get to Baltimore Airport 35 minutes before my flight. And when I do, I will capture 1 hour of productivity. I will have horizontalized myself. And that transition from vertical to horizontal, we're just at the beginning of it, and it's going on in every industry and institute. Those are the first two the first two convergences. The third convergence, because I called it a triple convergence, I'm full of numbers. The third convergence is that just when these 10 flatteners converged and created this platform, just when we all who are connected to the platform started to change our habits to get the most out of it, guess what happened? 3 billion people who were out of the game walked onto the playing field, called India, China, and the former Soviet Empire. And when did they arrive on the playing field? Just when it had been flattened. Just when they could compete, connect, and collaborate more directly than ever with your kids and mine. It is the simple argument of this book that these 3 convergences, these flatteners creating this new platform, these new habits of horizontalizing ourselves, and these 3 billion new players is going to shape the brief history of the 21st century. It is shaping the brief history of the 21st century. Now, before I end, let me point out just one other thing. And that was a kind of political perfect storm that completely disguised all of this that was happening. And this perfect storm was called Enron, 9/11, and the dot-com bust. Basically, Enron, in America at least, made every CEO guilty until proven innocent. And therefore, who wanted to talk to them about what was going on over here? 9/11 completely distracted us as a society from the president on down to the columnist. And the dot-com bust, that really made people stupid. Because the dot-com bust made people think that globalization was over. Because so many people equated the dot-com boom with globalization, they thought when the bust came along it was over, when in fact all the dot-com bust was doing was actually turbocharging globalization. The net result of that was that right when we reach what I think is going to be the mother of all inflection points. Friends, we're going from vertical to horizontal. This is going to change everything. This is going to be as big as Gutenberg and the printing press as it plays out. And it's not going to be in a year or two, but as it plays out. Just when we reach this incredible inflection point, nobody was telling the kids. Doing this book, I have to tell you, was like being in a science fiction movie. I'd go around and interview all these CEOs and CIOs and CTOs, but they were like pod people. They were like pod people in a science fiction movie. They all know the secret. They all know what's going on. And thank God they're doing it like crazy. But nobody's told the kids. Nobody's told the kids. So we just had an election in America We just had an election in America where the Democrats were debating whether NAFTA was a good idea. And the Republicans put duct tape over the mouth of Chief White House economist Greg Mankiw when he said outsourcing makes a lot of sense. And they stashed him in Dick Cheney's basement. Never to be heard from again. Has anybody seen Greg Mankiw? So right when we've reached this incredible inflection point, basically, no one's been talking about it in my society and preparing people for it. So I wrote this book, frankly, so that at least two kids, Orly and Natalie Friedman, were going to know what world they were growing up in. And it's a world where I've said many times, when I grew up in Minnesota, my parents used to say to me, Tom, finish your dinner. People in China and India are starving. And I tell my girls, finish your homework. Because people in China and India are starving for your jobs, and in a flat world, they can have them. There is no such thing as a Singaporean job or an American job in a flat world. Now, let me just end with an image that I think really conveys how revolutionary this moment is. Because when you think about uploading, what it really means is we're getting rid of the ceilings. There used to be a ceiling on what I could upload in terms of software, ceiling on my ability to upload news or audio or video. That ceiling, friends, is gone. We're getting rid of the ceiling. Well, the more I thought about that, I realized, wait a minute. We're also getting rid of the walls. That's what outsourcing and offshore, there used to be a wall. Whoever thought you could outsource radiology? All these things that were never tradable are now tradable. We're getting rid of the walls. And guess what? We're also getting rid of the floors. You see, there was always a hard floor, a hard cement floor under you and me in Kishore. You couldn't dig very deep into his life or his past. Oh, not anymore, friends. With Google, I can drill into your past. I can drill deeper. I can go all the way into your soul practice. The floors that used to protect us from below, they're gone. My daughter Googled her roommates before she went to college. Her roommates have Google profiles. How in the world? Where's it from? High school newspapers? The floor that used to be under us is gone. So be good. So when you put it all together, what's really revolutionary about this moment is that we're getting rid of the ceilings, we're getting rid of the walls as we've known them, and we're getting rid of the floors. And what will be the new sources of authority? What will be the new sources of legality in this new flat world? That all is going to have to be sorted out. As my friend Carly Fiorina, the former head of HP, said once, she said, you know, Tom, everything we called the IT revolution, the information technology revolution these last 20 years, I have to tell you, it was just the warm-up act. We are now just at the end of the beginning, and we are now about to see the real IT revolution with this new flat platform. So fasten your seatbelts, put your seat backs and tray tables into a fixed and upright position, because the world is flat. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, you better fasten your seatbelts, because now comes the really exciting part, the Q&A session. Because if you thought that Tom was good in the lecture, he's even better when it comes to question and answer. And our students, by the way, had the pleasure of having 1 hour exclusively with him today. And they discovered, number one, that he likes tough questions, and number two, he gives tough responses. So I hope you're ready with some tough questions. And those of you in the other rooms, by the way, the ushers will be giving out index cards. Please fill up your questions on the index cards, and I'll read them out here. I'm going to begin, Tom, by asking you one tough question. Okay, so just to set the tone for everybody. I remember when I saw the reviews of your first 2 books, From Beirut to Jerusalem, Alexis and the Olive Tree, almost, I would say, about 90% of the reviews were positive.
You didn't see all the reviews. But go ahead.
But this book, The World is Flat, I mean, I read what The Economist said, which said, don't read the book.
Yes.
I read what the New York Review of Books said, which said, he's got it all wrong. The world is not flat. Billions of poor people don't think it's a level playing field. They think the world is still very uneven. So how do you explain, number one, the tough criticisms, and what's your response to them?
Well, it's very interesting observation, excuse me, because the reality actually is quite different. One thing I'm an expert on, of course, is my own book reviews, as you know as an author. And it was actually Lexus and the Olive Tree that got mercilessly trashed.
Really?
Other than in a few places. And that was because globalization was just aborning then. And people really didn't want to hear kind of the message of that book from a lot of different perspectives. Now this book, I'm going to run into a certain amount of criticism. I'm not here to talk about first of all, here's what's new about this book. The world is flat. So more people actually heard about this book from me than ever heard about it from any reviewer, because I took advantage of the flat world. So the book was already number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list before it was ever reviewed in the New York Times. That was unheard of, 15 years ago. I mean, the New York Times was the gateway, for books. So this book's actually gotten incredibly favorable response, with a few noteworthy exceptions. One is John Gray, in the New York Review of Books, who wrote actually a very interesting, I'd urge people to read a very interesting critique of it. But John Gray is a lifelong critic of globalization who pronounced after 9/11 that globalization was over as a result of 9/11. So one should know that when one reads his review, but it comes from a Marxist point of view, and I thought it was a very interesting review, but it comes from a particular point of view. Now, some reviews are just kind of zany, for me, and you get those reviews. One thing that happens when you're a columnist is that the reviews are a free pie toss, that people can get even with you on your column, by just writing reviews. It's not about the column, of course, but it's about his book. So, look, I wrote a book that treads on, the playing field of certain economists. And sometimes economists aren't real kindly to a journalist who comes along and has his own argument and makes his own thesis and gets read. And so there's a certain amount of professional shtick, too. But then there is what I would call the kind of standard critique. And the standard critique is what Friedman doesn't understand is that the world isn't flat. Oh, no kidding. Okay. Now, I happen to have a whole chapter in the book called The Unflat World. My favorite thing is when they quote the statistic that only 2% of India actually works, 0.2% of India works in the IT industry. Of course, they don't mention, they got that statistic from my book. Okay. So I'm keenly aware that the world is not flat, which is why I have a whole chapter in the book about those parts of the world that aren't in it. But what is the job of the analyst? The job of the analyst is to identify emerging and defining trends, okay? Hopefully, if you're an entrepreneurial analyst, before other people identify them, to be the first to say that there's a clash of civilizations, to be the first to say that there's the end of history. Now, the real test is whether your argument, not just the metaphor, holds up. And I am keenly aware that the world isn't flat. But what I say in the book is that this flattening process, I believe, is the most important thing happening in the world today. And that, by the way, and this is what drives me nuts, about the argument that Friedman doesn't understand there are poor people out there, is that more people have gotten out of poverty in India and China, thanks to this flattening process, than anything in the history of the world. So if there's any hope of getting people out of poverty, what is it? To return to Nehruvian socialism? What am I missing exactly? The only hope of getting people out of poverty is by connecting more and more people in the $1 and $2 a day world with this platform and the education and the technology to access it, and spreading this platform in my country and in the developing world. So I never quite understand, what was I supposed to do? Just write a book, say, hey, there are poor people in the world. Here's another book to tell you that there are poor people in the world. I suppose I would have gotten a wonderful review in the Hindu, But, I don't think that is the job of the analyst, number one. But more importantly, as someone who actually cares about poor people, not just writes about poor people, I happen to think the flattening process actually holds out the first and greatest hope for more people to get out of poverty faster than ever before. So I'm quite unapologetic about it.
You can see that Tom likes tough questions. Who's next? Yes, please. Please just briefly identify yourself and where you're from.
Good afternoon, Mr. Friedman. Thanks a lot for the wonderful
Thank
lecture. Mine is a three-part question.
Well, you have 3 parts like the White House.
Okay. First part, I remember reading a news report when you launched your book in New Delhi. And I remember the chief guest there was India's Petroleum Minister, Mr. Manishankar Iyer.
Peculiar is right.
And Mr. Iyer, I remember, had disagreed with your view that the world is flat. And unfortunately, the news report ended there. It didn't include your response to Mr. Iyer's view. I'd be thankful if you could share your view.
Sure.
That's first question, first part. Second part is, you had recalled Mr. Nandan Nilekani's assertion that the world is flat. And you, being a trained journalist, seem to have accepted it as gospel. Do you think now America is ready, since Mr. Nilekani felt that America was not ready for the platform?
Good question.
Do you think now in September 2005, is America ready? Third part, you had just said you had attributed reduction of poverty in India and China to the process of flattening. Is there any hard evidence to support your view?
Sure.
Thanks.
Well, let's just start with the last one. In 1991, India was, to the extent that a country could be called going bankrupt, India was going bankrupt. It was down to $100 million in foreign reserves. That's not a, they was going to have to ship gold, I believe, to London at the time. And that's, of course, what prompted the elevation of Manmohan Singh to finance minister. Today, India's foreign reserves, I'm not up on the monthly total, but it's somewhere around $125 billion. So it's gone from $100 million to $125 billion in about a decade, basically, as a result of specific policies all revolved around globalizing, opening the Indian economy, and basically embracing what I would call the flattening process. So I can't give you any harder facts than that. And, you know, I have to say, I'm not Indian, but I go to India a lot. I have a lot of friends there. I think it's kind of neat, actually. Not just neat. I think it's a source of great personal dignity that Indians who had the talent and the brain power to really make a difference in the world don't have to give up their food, their culture, and their family, stand in line at the U.S. Embassy, and pray they win the lottery of the green card so they can come to frigid Minnesota in order to actually translate their skills. I think it's really kind of cool that they can now innovate without having to emigrate. So bless their hearts. I happen to think that's a really good thing. It's a really good thing for them and a really good thing for Indian culture. On your first point about Mani Shankar, I had the honor when I was in India last time of having lunch with the Prime Minister. And but he struck me afterwards as a man who had all the right instincts. I think he will go down as a revolutionary figure in India, the Deng Xiaoping of India. But I felt he was a man who had a ball and chain around his ankle called the Congress Party. And when I met Mani Shankar, I met the ball and chain. I did not get a chance to respond to his riposte. I found it utterly loopy. He blamed the fact that India was nearly bankrupt in 1991 on the Gulf War and the fact that there were no remittances coming from Indians in the Gulf, which is just stuff and nonsense. So, but I didn't get a chance to respond, so I can't suggest to you that I did. Is America ready? No. Have you seen any of the footage of New Orleans? You can see how unready parts of America still are. We're like any country. We're like Singapore. We're like India. We have our ready parts and our unready parts. But what has really struck me in going around America and talking about the book is how worried Americans are that they and their kids are not ready. And unfortunately, this is quantifiable because we are basically falling behind in every international test on math, science, that is done. And at the same time, this year we slipped to 16th in broadband penetration in the world per capita. So one of the reasons I think the book has actually done well in America is that it's tapped into, wasn't my intent, but it's tapped into something that Bill Gates said when I interviewed him for the book. And it's this. 30 years ago, if you had a choice of being born a B student in Poughkeepsie or a genius in Beijing or Bangalore, there was no question 30 years ago you wanted to be born a B student in Poughkeepsie, New York, because your life chances were so much greater as a B student in Poughkeepsie than a genius trapped in the Nehruvian socialist system of India at that time, or a genius caught up in the Cultural Revolution in China. Today, when the world is flat, you do not want to be a B student in Poughkeepsie. Not when every genius, not to mention B-plus student, in Singapore, Beijing, and Bangalore can plug and play, compete, connect, and collaborate more directly than ever. And at a gut level, Americans get that. Thank you.
Tom, we are running short of time, but we have a tremendous number of questions. But I would say that, the one theme that I'll come to you in a minute. The one theme that seems to come through in a lot of the questions is, what about the poor people in Africa? What about the people who are not connected to this platform? What's your solutions to them? How are you going to get them on the growth path?
Right.
What are your plans for them? That seems to be the theme of many of the questions.
Really, that's an important question. First of all, I guess I'd say two things. One is, I don't think poverty in Africa was born in the age of globalization. People kind of talk about these issues of income gaps and poverty as though there was this idyllic time before I came along and wrote about globalization when none of these problems existed. If we could only kind of get back to that time. So these are deep legacy problems that have been built up over a long time. there is only, in my view, one solution for Africa, for Singapore, and America, in my view, and that is governance, okay? That is, you are not going to affect a change. You're not going to get people out of poverty without decent governance. Governance that can provide the educational infrastructure and the technological infrastructure for people to connect to this platform. How one gets better governance in Africa, I can't say I have the cure to that. But the fact that I can't cure that in Africa, the fact that I can't deliver better governance in Africa, doesn't mean that I'm not going to identify the sources of prosperity through better governance, whether it's in India, China, or somewhere else. But there's only one solution, and that's better governance. And better governance starts maybe with African countries saying to someone like the head of Rhodesia today, a man, Robert Mugabe, who has driven his country into a ditch, into a complete ditch, a ditch of corruption and mismanagement. And the fact that not a single African leader is ready to stand up and call that by its real name, that's the travesty in the world. That's the only way Africa is going to get out of poverty. It's not going to come with me showering them with money so Mugabe can buy another Gulf Stream. All this politically correct nonsense. It's about calling things by their real name. Singapore didn't get to be Singapore because somebody showered aid on it. You got here by decent government that educated your people and connected you to the world. And I say hats off to that. But it ain't going to be any different for anybody else. And that first starts with how Africans are going to get themselves out of poverty. And boy, I stand there to help. But I'm not going to wait for the rest of the world when the leader of South Africa spends 5 years telling his people that AIDS is something that comes from a Western conspiracy and cannot utter a word of condemnation about his neighbor who has driven his country into a ditch. And if you'll pardon me for getting so upset about Zimbabwe, it's because one of my best friends comes from there. I know what's been going on there. That is the travesty in the world, not that I write about globalization. So, no need to. This isn't Crossfire. Thanks.
Okay, over there, then I'll come to. Please, go ahead. If you don't mind, you have to keep it quite brief because we are supposed to finish at 6:30, but we carry on for another 20 minutes.
Okay, I'll keep this quick. I see that there have been two aspects of your study from the past, which is the olive tree and the Lexus.
Yes.
And extrapolating the Lexus, you have created the world is flat. Now, taking a step back and looking at the olive tree from the eyes of the Lexus, how do you see the world changing, the traditional world changing because of the flatness? So what I mean is, how is it that Al-Qaeda is going to change in the future given the flat world?
Very good question. I'd say two kind of general responses I'd have to give you. One is that Al-Qaeda, of course, the flat world is a friend of Infosys and of Al-Qaeda. Exactly the same. Al-Qaeda is just an open source global supply chain. That's all it is. In fact, the guy who understood supply chain almost as well as Sam Walton of Walmart is Osama bin Laden. That's because he came out of the construction industry. So Al-Qaeda is just an open source global supply chain. And so that's kind of one problem. If you really get into the geek literature on open source, which I've actually become fascinated with, when I sort of say the world is, we're getting rid of the walls, ceilings, and floors, what the open source people will say, people who are really into network world, is that when you say, where will the new norms come from? They will tell you the network will do it. The network will produce its own norms. So they'll point, for instance, to eBay. eBay is a complete wall-less, ceiling, floorless marketplace. But there had to be norms in a marketplace, so eBay developed a star system. So if I do a transaction with you, and you're a good partner in this transaction, I give you a star, as you know, and first you go from red star, blue star, gold star, etc. So actually, the network developed a set of norms. But whenever I hear that, I always say to the geek community, yes, but Al-Qaeda is also a network. And it's developing a whole different set of norms. The network will actually work to develop norms if it's heterogeneous. If it, a lot of different perspectives. But if it's actually homogeneous, it may have just the opposite effect. Another impact of the flat world, I happen to believe 9/11 is a lot about humiliation, if you've read my writing, about that. And unfortunately, one thing about the flat world is that it delivers humiliation fiber optically. It intensifies it. You see, in the flat world, you can see ever more clearly just where the caravan is and just how far behind you are. And therefore, to me, 9/11 coinciding with the emergence of the flat world is not an accident. The third thing I'd say is this, and that leads to the last chapter of the book, which is called 11/9 or 9/11. See, because to me, 11/9 and 9/11 are really the two competing forms of imagination in the world today. And imagination becomes more important than ever, because if individuals now have the tools to upload all kinds of things, the critical differentiator is actually what they imagine to do with those tools. So the imagination of 11/9 was someone in Hungary in 1989, in the leadership in Hungary, said, somebody had this conversation. Imagine if we, Hungary, let all these people from East Germany come in this door, and then we open our border to Austria. We could bring down the Berlin Wall. And that's what they did. Bless their hearts. Unfortunately, what we know from the 9/11 Commission is someone in Kandahar, Afghanistan, also had a conversation. They said, imagine if we hit the Twin Towers somewhere between the 94th and 98th floor. We could bring them down. So one form of imagination brought down the Berlin Wall, and another form brought down the Twin Towers. And that's why getting more people to have the right kind of imagination, an almost absurd task to even think about because it's so broad and diverse, but it's really important.
Okay, let me ask the Ambassador of Switzerland, and then I'll come to you. A short, quick question. Please go to the mic, Daniel.
Thank you. It really is a bit the same question or questions that were asked before. But I would like you to go on the Zimbabwe example.
Mm-hmm.
Is the flat world going to make the emperor so naked everybody realizes? We don't have to look to Africa. I've been very much in diplomatic service. When we watched Srebrenica, it was on TV. It was every night playing out. Mm-hmm. Nobody, at least in Europe, did do anything about it. Mm-hmm. Where is your confidence that things have really changed?
Well,
in making it a better world.
We're getting really far afield from my book now. My book is about the technological forces that kind of produce the flattening world. And what you're asking me is, is the flattening world going to save the world and improve government all over? And that's really, frankly, it's outside the scope of my book. I try to explain in the book that the flat world is a friend of good guys and bad guys. It's all still depends on human intervention and human leadership. Okay? People finally stepped in Bosnia to stop a massacre when leaders around the world, both thought leaders and political leaders, created a critical mass to do that. And so that still matters. But we're certainly going to know faster and faster about more of these problems, and maybe that transparency will be in the long term a net plus rather than net minus. But Africans who care and are informed, they know what's going on in Zimbabwe. It's the leadership that's missing.
I thought you were going to say the answer to good governance is the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy.
Absolutely. It's why it's so important.
Okay, you.
Hi, William Hahn, Straits Times.
There's someone up there, too.
Yeah. After that, I'll go to the lady. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead, please. No, you speak, yeah.
Hey, Mr. Friedman. I could just ask you to be a bit more local-minded for a second. given how much the flattening of the world has to do with the rise of China and India, what does this mean for Southeast Asia, given that historically it's the crossroads between these two parts of the world?
Well, I'm a big bull, basically, on Southeast Asia, generally speaking, the tigers, Singapore included, because Southeast Asia has, I think, one of the single greatest advantages that one can have in the flat world, at least countries like Hong Kong, places like Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Korea. You are blessed. You are blessed with the fact that you have no natural resources, which is the single greatest advantage in the flat world. You have what I call in the book a very high coefficient of flatness. And because the flatter your country is, the more you have to drill your own people, their energy, creativity, entrepreneurship, men and women, rather than drill a sand dune in order to advance your standard of living. And people and countries that drill their people create societies that maximize their ability to drill their people, to unleash their energy, entrepreneurship, and creativity. And when you drill your people, that's an oil well that never runs dry. So the fact that what happens, of course, is that countries like Singapore, Taiwan, they develop the DNA, basically, where they're always looking, when faced with a challenge, to reach for a shovel, to dig inside themselves, rather than reach for a wall to protect them from the world. And that coefficient of flatness, it's true of companies as well. As I said in my talk, Walmart's the biggest company in America. Now, in doing this book, I did something I should have done a long time ago. I actually went to Walmart headquarters. Oh, you got to go to Walmart headquarters. And citizens of Singapore would get this immediately. Walmart headquarters are in Bentonville, Arkansas. The biggest company in America is headquartered in Little Abner country of Bentonville, Arkansas. We are talking about the armpit of America, okay? I mean, the end of the world, all right? Now, you really have to step back and ask yourself, how in the world did America's biggest company, and it's still headquartered in Bentonville, Arkansas? So I come there, met by the Walmart representative. We go by a building, I kid you not, corrugated, made of corrugated sides and corrugated roof. He says, that's our international headquarters. Okay. The offices of Walmart's chairman, okay, senior VP, CIO, and CFO look exactly like the offices of the principal and deputy principals of my daughter's elementary school before they were remodeled, okay? Now, that, of course, is the whole secret of Walmart. Because old Sam Walton, he's right out of the Beverly Hillbillies. But you know what? When you've got to get stuff from Shenzhen, China to Bentonville, Arkansas, guess what? You become the first adopter of every new technology. And Walmart became the richest company in America because they were the first adopter of everything. Internet, wireless, computers in stores. The Beverly Hillbillies out-innovated everybody else because they had no choice but to do so. They had an enormously high coefficient of flatness.
Before I turn to you, to be fair to the others in the other rooms, one question that keeps coming up is,
Please.
How could things go wrong in Asia? How could China go wrong? How could India go wrong?
It's an important question. I more turn it to you, Kishore. But to me, it all comes back to governance, basically. I'm asked a lot Whenever I go to China, people ask me about India. Whenever I go to India, people ask me about China. And so I've kind of developed this answer, because I look at China and India as kind of two superhighways, right? And the Indian superhighway is this 6-lane superhighway. It's beautifully paved, sidewalks, street lamps. There's just one problem. Off in the distance, there's a speed bump called political reform.
That's China.
That's China. I'm sorry, that's China. I'm sorry. I'm really a little jet lagged. So Chinese superhighway, sidewalks, street lamps, but off in the distance, there's a speed bump called political reform. Now, when 1.3 billion Chinese going 80 miles an hour hit a speed bump, one of two things is going to happen. Car jumps up in the air, slams down. Everyone looks around. You okay? You okay? Drives on, past the speed bump. The other thing that happens is the car hits the speed bump, jumps up in the air, slams down, and all the wheels fall off. Now, which it will be with China, I have no idea. But I do know there is a speed bump down the road. Now, India is also a superhighway. It's full of cracks and potholes. Half the places don't have sidewalks, and most of the street lamps are out. But off in the distance, it looks like that Indian superhighway smooths out into a 6-lane road with sidewalks and street lamps. To me, the question about India is what I see in the distance a mirage or the oasis? Is it the real deal or just a mirage? So to me, both of these countries have two big question marks down the road, and I think that will determine a lot about that question.
Over to you.
Yeah, a key response to a flat world is how we educate our kids.
Mm-hmm.
If you had the power to make a change in the U.S. at the high school and at the university level, what would you suggest?
Great question.
Yeah, similar question here, by the way. What do you do about education in the
And
US?
the question you've asked is really the question I got most in America on my book tour, back to the earlier question about kind of is America ready? And I have a lot, I think about this. My wife teaches first grade reading in public schools, so we talk about this a lot. And in talking about it around America, I often, parents would stand up and say, my daughter is studying Chinese. She's going to be okay, right? And my answer is always, not exactly. Really, what the conclusion I've come to is that in the flat world, the single greatest skill you can have is actually the ability to learn how to learn. Because jobs are going to change so much faster as we connect all these knowledge pools together that my girl's chance of, like me, working for the same company basically my whole life are about zero. So it's actually the ability to learn how to learn, which is going to be the defining skill. So during my early book tour, that's what I would tell people. Till I came to my hometown in Minneapolis. I was actually in St. Paul at the Fitzgerald Theater, and a 9th grader stood up, identified himself as a 9th grader, and said, Mr. Friedman, that's really interesting, but I just have one question. How do you learn how to learn? What course do you take? So I had to think about that, and standing on one leg, I said to this young man, I said, my gut tells me that here's what you should do. You should go around and ask all your friends who are their favorite teachers. Make a list, and then take their courses, no matter what they're teaching. Greek mythology, calculus, European literature. Because kids learn how to learn by loving how to learn, by being self-motivated. And that comes, in part, some kids are naturally self-motivated, and often by having great teachers. So I don't really remember much of what my favorite teachers taught me anymore, as a man of 52, but I sure remember loving to learn it. So I always say in a flat world, CQ will trump IQ every day of the week. CQ is curiosity quotient. If I have a choice between someone with a high IQ who's lazy And someone who's got a high CQ, oh, give me the person with high CQ anytime. Because in a world where you can upload, that young woman or young man, they're going to be dynamite. The other thing I'd say about education is that what's happening in the flat world is a very interesting book, if you get a chance to read, by a guy named Dan Pink called A Whole New Mind. And what Dan points out basically is, we got left brain and right brain. Your left brain, that was the statistical, number crunching, rote learning kind of side of your brain. Your left brain was very busy the day you took your SATs, okay? And your right brain is your storytelling, imaginative, really creative side of your brain. What basically is happening in the flat world is that all the stuff your left brain does is either going to get automated or outsourced. That's a crude exaggeration, but basically that's what's happening. So really developing your right brain stuff, that's going to be critical. So that actually comes from, I give a lot of graduation speeches, and one of the standard lines is always, do what you love. Hey, I did what I loved, Do what you love, as Dan points out. That's no longer gooey advice at graduation day. That's a survival strategy. Because people who do what they love what they do, and they will constantly love to learn. But the last thing I would simply say about this, no one is immune from it. I wrote this book because I basically went to India and said, you know what? I don't know what's going on. My software is out of date. I need to go back to school. And so I took a sabbatical and tried to update my software. So I'm not any different from anybody else. But so those were just some reactions.
I think we'll take one last question from the auditorium here, and 2 questions I'll read out to you from
Please.
this. Please.
I'm going to ask you the most stupid question.
Please. There's no such thing as stupid questions, only stupid answers. You know that.
I came across a statement that words are the bugle of change. Can you explain to me, why bankers, big boys of the world,
manufactured.
The digital skills of craftsmen throughout Central Asia,
Yes.
knotting, crafting, would provide millions of microeconomic
Yes.
up this craft, really the love of those tribal
Right.
and village people. The world understood that if they brought in village people for economy, in fact, be more powerful than Mr. Bush.
Sure. Well, I don't know if you've been on eBay lately, but eBay is full of just what you're talking about.
No, but
Yeah.
you see, you have to recreate this culture, village skills. Because Gandhi said, violence, condition of poverty, can only be cured by village skills.
Right. I think your question answers itself, but I appreciate the intervention. Thank you.
And if you, who is a worldwide author, could insist that every CEO, every banker, and everybody, when they talk about making cars, computers, or anything which the machine makes,
Right.
because it's press button, uses the word machine facture.
Gotcha. We'll start a revolution. Thank you.
Started.
All right. Thanks for your
Okay,
question.
last 2 questions. I'll pick the toughest ones, okay? One is, what about the olive tree, Iraq, oil prices, future of government? And the last one, how does the socio-economic revolution that you analyze so well affect the global political landscape? What about politics?
Well, there's no You know, I am, as I say in the book, I've been accused of being a technological determinist, to which I say, guilty as charged, Your Honor. That is, I believe if, like in strategic theory, capabilities create intentions. If people have the technology, they will use it. In that sense, I'm a determinist. But I'm not a historical determinist. What they will use it for, whether it's for 11/9 purposes or 9/11 purposes, that really depends on governance. You know, it gets back to the leadership question. Leadership broadly construed, though, not just presidents and prime ministers, but thought leaders, academic leaders, and most of all, parents. Actually, that was the one thing I forgot to your question about education. What I really believe is that the only way you're going to get better education in America is with different kind of parenting. Because it really is so much about what happens at home and the values that are set there, how much kids are nurtured to read or taught to read or forced to read. My wife always said, I've never met a kid who was a good reader who wasn't also a good student. And maybe I can tie all this up, in fact, with a letter I got just a couple weeks ago, which will go back to your good question and your question, from a teacher in Tacoma, Washington. He taught in a private school in Tacoma, Washington. And he wrote me, he said, Mr. Friedman, I read your book, and I would just like to tell you about 3 parent-teacher conferences I had last year. Conference number 1 was with Mr. and Mrs. Singh. Well, you know where they're from. And they came in to tell me that I just was not giving enough homework to their daughter. Second conference was with Mr. and Mrs. Eastern European name. I don't remember what it was. They came in to say that if we didn't have a science textbook, a proper science textbook in this private school, they were going to pull their son out. That it was a travesty that this private school in Tacoma, Washington, didn't have a proper science textbook. Third parent-teacher conference was with Mr. and Mrs. John Q. Doe Americans. They came in to say that I was giving way too much homework. Little Johnny is totally stressed out. You don't understand that he has soccer practice, then karate. He needs a little time with the Game Boy. And there's just way too much homework. And that's a real problem, because in a flat world, we're melding with cultures that have very high ethic of education. And to me, whether we're talking about the values of 11/9 or the values of education, political leaders are very important, but it starts really at home. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't think I need to say anything else. The only thing I was going to end by quoting one of my favorite philosophers, Karl Marx, who said that philosophers have always tried to explain the world. The whole point is to change it. And I think in that sense, frankly, Tom, you're a Marxist.
I am.
You may be trying to describe a flat world, but in what you're doing, you're actually flattening it. And the fact that you can get so much excitement here in Singapore, which is exactly on the opposite side of New York City, the same kind of excitement about the world is flat, actually demonstrates how the world is flat. And thank you again.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You should go soon, because you have to... I think one or two guys may want to sign a book, and then...
Sure.
What are you guys doing here? I thought I saw a familiar face.